Hello, everybody, and welcome to Getting APIs to Work. In today's episode, we have Marcelo Araujo of Bosch, of the Center for Enablement. That's important. Hey, Marcelo, how are you doing?
Hey, Eric, how's it going? I'm doing well. You?
Yeah, it's going well. Thank you. So we'll talk about, we have kind of, I would say, a controversial title. We have Centralized Management of Decentralization. And I think I threw that title basically just at you and said, what do you think? So if you hear that title that I made up for us, what does it trigger in your mind when you think of what Bosch is doing? Or first just give us a little description of where you are in Bosch, which is a giant organization, and then how those two words kind of resonate with you.
All right. So yeah, Bosch is a pretty big organization. We're almost 395,000 employees globally.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty big organization. I work at a department of the IT of Bosch, and it's a central department, as more like large organizations usually do. And we deliver services for all the verticals. For example, the automotive division, the consumer goods division, the power tools division, among others. Bosch has, well, if I'm not mistaken, over 27 different business units. So we are the central department of that. And the way that the title resonates is that as a central department, you try usually centralize things, because we most of the time believe that's the most efficient way to deliver to such a large organization, deliver IT and services to the large organization. But then I also believe that while being centralized, putting us in a good position to work with everybody, all these business units have different needs. Therefore, decentralization might makes a lot of sense in those situations.
Yeah, I love that you just said the most efficient way, because I think that's true. And I always try to make a very clear distinction between effectivity or effectiveness and efficiency, right? Where first you think about what you're even trying to do, and then you figure out a good way how to do it. Mm-hmm. And I think, that idea of IT being efficient comes from this kind of old days where everybody wanted to do the same things anyway, right? You said, okay, we do our accounting with IT, we do our customer management with IT, we do this and that. So these were all capabilities that I think were relatively similar across maybe even large organizations. So I guess it made sense to say, let's just do it in one place and make it efficient, right? But nowadays, I think with IT growing more and more, let's say, or the things that you do with IT growing more and more, and also not so much being back office things anymore, but also a lot of very business related things, right? That becomes a very different story. And when we talked initially, you mentioned this idea of shadow IT popping up in all these different organizations. Tell us a little bit more about how that manifests itself and why you think that happens.
Right. So I think mainly because each business unit is having transformation, or sorry for saying this, but a digital transformation. Sorry for this word. But they're requiring more and more services, right? So it's sometimes, even for a central organization, it's sometimes very hard to keep up with that demand of their willing to consume technology as fast as ever before. So I think that is one of the reasons that sparks this shadow IT, which I don't know if I like the term a lot, because it for me almost implies something negative, but in the end, it's just a response to a need.
I totally agree. I like the term because it's always nice to have a catchy name that people recognize, but I totally agree that it's kind of actually almost good when this happens, because you realize that, this organization, they realize they want to do something and their needs are not met, right? So they figure out a way how to get it done.
Right, exactly. And that's where I guess maybe the decentralization comes in. So the work we try to do is there to help them out with that. So instead of being there as a central team to provide 100% of the service to them, why cannot be the ones that guide them do it or empower them to do it? And since they're going to do it anyway, because by the end of the day, they need to make revenue, right? They have their own needs. So why not there, instead of being a central IT that can block, why not enable? Why not be there to teach them how to do it right? Because they're going to do it regardless, right? Because again, in the end of the day, they need to generate revenue.
Yeah, I think that's a very good mindset. And you already talked about that when we spoke earlier, that you want to move from kind of doing stuff for people or being the bottleneck, so to speak, and more just enabling them and helping them.
Mm-hmm.
But like at some level, it seems a little bit to me that there are certain facets, I would say, in the API space where centralization may make sense. Such as, like these kind of a catalog of API capabilities you can find, tooling that you may make available where it makes sense to say, well, whoever wants to use this tooling, we have it, right? So these kind of things. And I'm wondering, what would your approach be to kind of draw a line between the things where you say, well, for those things, these actually maybe we can centralize without becoming a bottleneck.
Right.
And for those, we really shouldn't even try because it's not going to end well.
Right. I think first one that came to my mind is standards. And the way, I just need to be careful to say this, but the way that I usually approach is I like the idea of having centralized standards, but there's a fine line there how to apply and model them for each business unit. So that's a little bit different. What I usually say in the end is like you as a customer from a brand, you expect consistency across products. You don't know exactly how that organization is set up behind, if they're different, if they're set up in different countries, but in the end you expect one product or many products with the same feeling and same quality. So that's why I like the idea of having the centralized, for example, in among other things, standards. But again, when it comes to apply, I think that could be, we can have a wiggle room and how that can tailor back to the business. Maybe a relationship will be a federal and state laws or something like that. So you have some that governs a direction of a country, but then you leave to the state to decide how to better apply them.
That, I think, is a very good imagery to understand it, right? Where you say and I think depending on the country you live in, I live in Switzerland, right? And Switzerland also has a very strong federal culture. I mean, like trying to do as many things on lower levels of the government, right? So they really try to be very as strict as they can, basically only solving problems on the federal level that need to be solved on the federal level. And they try to push down as much as possible, which sometimes, seeing that we're in COVID times, is maybe not such a great idea.
Right.
But generally speaking, I think it is a principle that can make a lot of sense. And it speaks, I think in Switzerland specifically, just going back to that little political analogy, it speaks to the fact that Switzerland, just by its very nature, right, has different languages, has very different geographic regions. So I think everybody's very aware that the country is pretty heterogeneous. And like that is kind of the focus on the federal model is kind of a response to that. And I think that could apply to organizations as well.
Right. Yeah. And among other things, that's one, right? The practices are one. I also believe that some sort of tooling as well is a beneficial one. Being platform, like an API management platform that we have internally for all business unit do, and the way we do, I think, is pretty also efficient. Back on that talk, because we provide pretty much a self-service. So it's the function again back to this decentralization. We establish a platform that is meant to all business units to use, but it's self-service. So you go there, you create your own API management organization, you publish your own APIs. If you're the owner of the data, you have the ability to publish because you own the data. Data is yours in the end. So that's also an approach that supports. That's kind of our vision to decentralize. Yeah.
And that's also a little bit of a carrot and stick method, I'm assuming. At least that's what I also often tell organizations. It's like trying to kind of just enforce standards, right, is one thing, and often like people then find this as being overly constraining and restricted. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, if you help them, right, if you gently help them to move in that direction with tooling and support and explaining them why it matters and so forth, I think the likelihood of everybody just going in that direction is bigger than if you try to like just pull out the stick and hit everybody who's not following your guidelines.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of, especially when it comes to now standards and design, there's a lot of subjectivity to it, and a lot of domain expertise to it. And if you're a business unit, you own the domain. If you're a central division, you own the standards. We need to combine them. There's just a natural conflict there that cannot happen. So yeah, we need to come to these terms to find the best balance there. Yeah.
And it's also a question, I think, how you evolve those guidelines. They will never be written in stone forever. Mm-hmm. And if you evolve them in a way where everybody can contribute to them, right, I think you kind of also almost naturally get the best possible evolution path because you get everybody's input. The model that I liked a lot actually was, I don't know whether you remember that in the CAM book, the Continuous API Management book, there's one chapter that Ronnie Mitra wrote about decision processes, right? And in the decision processes, there's different ways how you can design the decision processes. And one possible way is to say, well, initially, design decisions are made centrally, but they can be challenged by anybody. Mm-hmm. And then kind of the process goes back to the central unit, which basically then may reject this or may say, oh, yeah, that's a good idea, too. That becomes a new accepted way of doing things. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, do you have like API design guidelines that are already distributed to all the business units?
Right. So yes and no. So we do have, as a central IT, we do have a design guideline. And that's been the case for, I would say, at least 6 years. Okay. But actually now, one of the things that one step I'm taking with my team as we kind of own the central IT guidelines is to open source them or inner source them. So we're now in the process of transforming those guidelines into a more source control friendly way, so people can contribute with pull requests, and we can have a body of people looking at them. But we're now inner sourcing them. But bottom line, we're going to open to the organization so everybody can contribute, and in the end, we can do something which is better for everybody.
Nice. Definitely ping me when you have them ready, if they will become publicly available. But I like that idea. And a lot of organizations are making theirs available because in the end, there's really nothing secret in there, right? It's just a choice of...
Right. Yeah.
One thing I found interesting, sorry, one thing, because you just inspired me to think of that. Recently, there was this article about the Google API guidelines, the API improvement proposal. And what I just found so interesting about those API improvement proposals is that an integral and important part of the guidelines is that they talk about how to change the guidelines, right? And I just like that idea of the guidelines themselves from the very beginning, focusing also on, and we know this is just how we do it now, and here is how we will continually change that. So
yeah, I think it is important, Eric, because one thing that I experience as in these areas particularly, but also in the other centralized services, that alone creates tension. Because again, you're telling me if you have an expert on the other end, who expert is the expert? So I think naturally people will question your guidelines. But as soon as you open the doors and open them to contribute, so like if you don't like, you're more than welcome to change, to help us change, then the conversation goes to another level. You go to where the contribution becomes more evident than the questioning.
But I think that is in part because what you're doing there is almost like social engineering, right? If you open up the guidelines, then basically everybody starts communicating at the same level, right? Everybody is perceived and acknowledged as an expert,
Mhm.
and therefore you can have these conversations on eye level, and
Mhm.
you can have conversations around, is that a good idea or not? And
Mhm.
well, in the end, still some process needs to be there to decide whether that becomes a new accepted practice or not.
Mhm.
But I think it definitely makes it much easier for people to accept something when they also know how they can change it,
Yep.
and not just like, here it is, follow the rules.
Correct.
And we also mentioned in our talks before the recording, the community of practice that you're building, and I think
Yep.
that is also a very important like piece in that puzzle. Tell us a little bit about that.
Correct. Definitely plays a role in that. So again, the reason why me, and shout out to my other two colleagues, Georg and David, we established this community of practices is to really the sheer size of Bosch. So there's so much going on in the company, so many cool things happening in the company, and it's sometimes very hard to exchange information on what's happening. So use cases that people are cool use cases that we believe one unit is doing will be beneficial to the other one. So one of the first ideas was to establish this so they can exchange a place or API that people that love APIs can come and exchange information around APIs at our company. But also,
Mhm.
also try to create this governance by community, maybe, which is having those people understanding the principles that we preach a lot, which is API first, like do APIs before implementation. Make sure your API is the first entry point to your application, and make sure API is readable and understandable. And we want to use the community of practice as a place to cultivate this know-how, so these people can spread in their organization. They can pollinize that knowledge within their org. So I think it's a very fun and a good way to disseminate knowledge in such a large organization.
Mhm. So this would enable people to just better understand why APIs matter, how to design them, and so forth.
Mhm.
How does it relate to this tension that we have in the title? Centralization versus decentralization. So when it comes to actually, let's say, implementing APIs,
Mhm.
deploying them, operating them, all of this, is that something where you even try to provide infrastructure support, or is that something where you would then firmly say, well, that is something that individual business units needs to figure out? What we will allow you to do is manage the APIs once they are implemented and deployed, basically.
Right. I think it's a little different. So we try to on the community of practice there, we try to stay really in the exchange level. We don't necessarily discuss. There's a forum where people can come and post questions like, I want to what is the best environment for me to deploy this API in our organization, because we have our own tooling and own processes. So this exchange naturally happen between members, but we don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily talk a whole lot about those services. We more try to get into people to buy in, and because that relates better where we are in our journey, which is understand is in the beginning. So we're still trying to convince people it's the API is a good thing, although we have a pretty good traction internally. But we're still in the phase of trying to make people understand, which is a good thing to do, is generates value in those dimensions and so on.
That's another interesting conversation we had, this whole idea of how to even motivate people, right? Why would you even create an API
Uh,
if you can get something done, let's say, in a smaller circle, and that's kind of good enough for your immediate needs? So why contribute to sort of the bigger level of the organization, right? Where you would say, well, here's an API that anybody can use, and not just like those in the know in my business unit. So I think that also is a very typical problem in large organization. This kind of the the what's in it for me factor, right? Why would I even do this if it only creates work and I don't see what I'm getting out of it. So what are your thoughts on that? That I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, definitely. That's what, if not the biggest challenge we have, one of the biggest challenges we have. But on the end of the day, I really want to believe that all developers understand the value. So I don't. But when it comes to now bringing my API to the organization, to the internal or to share with other internal teams, that inherently brings additional overhead, I would say, to you, because that other party will start relying on your service, right? I'm building my application now that consumes Eric's API. If Eric's API goes down, my application goes down. So how do we then provide Eric with the necessarily maybe budget, hours, and incentives to keep that API up so Marcelo's app is up? This becomes particularly challenging into a project-driven or a cost-centered department, because you don't necessarily have an influx of fund to keep that API up, but rather you touch the API when a project requires.
Yeah, in particular, if operating costs, right, are basically assigned by where the cost occurs and not so much, where it generates value, then you may end up with bearing all of the cost and others potentially kind of benefit from it, right? And you kind of don't really get anything out of it.
Right. Yeah. And sorry. And also understanding value is also something different as well that we need to work on. That if people how can they, if they're consuming the API, if they're providing an API, do they exactly know the reasons why they're doing it? So some people, we say that they're just exposing because they're told to expose, not necessarily knowing why they should expose, but because they don't understand the value. And I guess if you marry that, understanding that what role that tiny API plays in the whole transformation thing, and also bringing these incentives in so that people can have an influx or whatever incentives that is, right, to keep API product owner happy and proud of his APIs, then we're golden. I guess there's just two dimensions we want to address. I used to say that it's not easy because now instead of you're making your own lunch, now you're opening a restaurant. So it's not necessarily the same thing. You build your API for yourself, but now all of a sudden, restaurants open, people are coming to consume your meal. So
yeah, that's a good point of putting it, and I think that also that hints to the cultural dimension of all of this, right? Where you would say, in the end, every API has potential value, right? Because you could build something with it. Not every API will actually realize this value because maybe it never gets used by anybody or not in any meaningful shape or form. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, if you are serious about digital transformation, I think you consciously want to make this space of possibilities as big as you possibly can, mm-hmm. by allowing people to build more things because they can build on more things, right? And that, I think, becomes this kind of this investment idea that you have to have, where you say, having an API, assuming that every API, from the very beginning, becomes a fully justified investment, mm-hmm. is probably not that great, right? But saying that making it easy to deploy APIs so that everybody just does it, right? Then kind of that investment is more into the culture, I would say, and into the landscape as a whole. But that is also, I think that is a deeply cultural thing that needs to happen in the organization, right? As long as you're married to these traditional mechanics of show me the Excel sheet that tells me how much this thing is generating, mm-hmm. right? Then that's a challenge.
Yeah, and we used to say that also having as many APIs as we can up, like you said, or bringing this barrier down, is I think one of the key elements for innovation as well, especially in a larger setup as we are. Like if you mash up an automotive API with a house good APIs, you might create a new product for this company, but you can only do that if his things is there, right?
I'm sure, like just given the size of Bosch and the variety of things that Bosch is doing, and also like all the scenarios where Bosch things are embedded and these kind of things, right? I'm sure if you would do, and maybe you've done it, if you would do internal hackathons, I'm sure, right, you would come up with some really interesting, at least, ideas. Have you done that already? Did you run?
Yes, we did. Actually, we did one. It was maybe 5 years ago. We were launching our developer portal, developer.bosch.com. And in order to promote, we staffed with a lot of APIs there. And we got a lot of teams from different sizes of the companies to not only use it as experiment to tell or to get a feedback on what they found, how easy they find the developer portal, but also to incentivize this mashup of different APIs.
I remember seeing that. Back then I worked at CA, and I did see. I think that was at least the portal was public, right?
Well, the portal is public. Yes, we have two dimensions, internal and external. But yes, there's a public.
It was super nicely done. I remember seeing that. I was impressed. Yeah,
that's cool. Yeah, I'm super proud of that because again, as an employee of the company, I'm proud that the company is going that direction or having its own developer portal. It makes me proud.
Yeah, and it is a journey, right? It doesn't go within a couple of weeks, a month.
Yeah.
Of those hackathon things, have you followed any of the? I mean, did something come out of it in terms of, and maybe not, just like a product, but like, did you follow some stories that were conceived at this event?
Yeah, so there is one interesting case. I don't know. I don't have exactly the whole information about it, but I know that I want to say in the first hackathon we did in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, one of the use cases, I think the one that won, he was taken into the Bosch. Bosch has a incubator program, so you can help teams develop ideas. And I know that one use case there went to that program, which is really cool. So they went and get the extra funding to develop that idea in order to bring to the market. I don't think that ended up being a product, to be honest with you, but they did go into the innovation cycle following the hackathon.
Yeah, but that's fine. And I think, it doesn't need to be necessarily the case that something out of these things actually does start becoming like a viable product. But I think just having that mindset, and also sparking that idea in other people's heads, it's like, look, this is why we're doing this, so that you have more cool stuff happening within the company. I think that's a really good way to go.
Correct. The success for us there was that people understand the value of what we're doing. In the end, the implicit value, having the portal, having APIs there, having people consuming different APIs you didn't know existed. That's what won, or how does success look like for us there. People understand that, and I guess we achieved that in the smaller, because the participants, I guess, left the hackathon understanding that value, that tool, that mindset generates value.
If you could give people who are, let's say, in similar positions like you, let's say a pretty large organization with a willingness to adopt APIs, but let's say not really very far along that path, and somebody who is in a similar role than you are, like, if you could give them like one or two pieces of advice, which you think was really effective, what will those things be?
Yeah, I guess the education is always one, and I think one of the best ways in a larger setup is to start establishing a community, start exchanging more. So open up the doors, or try to make the communication to another level. Try to connect as many people as possible that are passionate about that. And the second thing I would say, because then you help you pollinize know-how to our organization. And the second thing I would say is in a larger setup, sometimes just because of the sheer size, it is hard to get initiative in the larger scale going. So my advice would be, you can maybe start with one small team, demonstrate value in a product, in a project, in a program, make sure that you understand the value, make sure you get a lighthouse product. I think others will then start looking at differently, especially the business people say, oh, they use the APIs and now they're more efficient, whatever that the good outcome is. But it's easier to demonstrate value other than trying to do that to every single team in the company. Get one lighthouse, make it a success, then you go from there.
Yeah, I like that. My colleague Brian Otten, he always tells these large organizations, don't try to boil the ocean.
Well, exactly. Yeah, perfect.
And I think that's a good way of putting it. Yeah,
perfect. I'm gonna steal that code now.
So coming back to our title, right, where it's like, so we said centralized management of decentralization. So what you're saying, and I mean, I totally buy into this, right, is like start small, pick something where you can demonstrate value, start building a community. So that kind of almost is a centralized kind of sort of nucleus of that, right? But now we then as our kind of final topic, let's look at now how can you make that step now to this decentralization phase, so to speak. And I also remember when we were speaking earlier, you said your ideal scenario basically would be to make yourself unnecessary.
Right.
In that centralized role, right? So I really like that mindset where you say, well, if everybody is doing it great in the different organizations, then, well, my work is done here. I can move on.
Yeah.
So what do you see as the crucial pieces, to make that step from that centralized nucleus and then getting it to the point where you're not becoming this bottleneck, but you are like scaling it up, so to speak, in the best possible way? I think that's the tricky part here.
Yeah, exactly. Because we will have to scale before we die, like make this like a sun. We have to grow in size to help as many people as possible, and we're gonna disappear.
Giant, you're swallowing everything.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the challenges now is that we have is having more buy-in and growing our initiative that eventually is gonna die. That's a kind of a controversial way of handling organization.
There, yeah.
So it's kind of it's controversial and not necessarily easy to understand. They're going to staff a team that's going to disappear. What's the deal with that? So yeah, I think that's what our challenge is now. So we need to grow because we need to work with more team as possible in order to help as many people as possible. But again, we'll then be in like I said, my motto is that we're kamikaze. We need to live within those people. Our knowledge needs to be transported to them. And in the end, they are self-sufficient. They are sufficiently, experts now in their topic, and they can live and disseminate further and further the knowledge of the organization. So again, that's where we are now. Yeah, trying to grow something that necessarily is not going to last long. Hopefully, because that will be a success.
I almost agree. I still think that, for those communities and these kind of things, right, you still need, because things will keep changing, right? It's not that at some point you can say everybody is an API expert now, we can stop basically disseminating information because everybody knows everything that needs to be done. I think that maybe is where I would say it a little bit different. So for example, just yesterday, I think I read about this thing that now there's HTTP 3, right? So HTTP 3 is actually relatively different from HTTP 2 in some ways of how it just works on kind of the network level, right? So these are the things where I think there's still roles where you could say, look, technology is evolving. Here's a new way how we can do things. Or if it comes to streaming, right? It's like, let's say your company hasn't done streaming so far a lot, and then suddenly people realize, oh, we read more and more about streaming. What's up with that, right? And I think there always probably will be that role of people who are kind of following what's going on and just keep disseminating knowledge into the organization, which may not always be picked up, but at least it is something where over time you might realize that, oh, there's this new thing and maybe we can do things better if we use this, right? Or new tooling, these kind of things. So that's why I think it still might make sense to have these kind of centralized, but still definitely also a supportive role, right? But these teams that would their role basically would be to have this continuing education kind of.
Correct. Yeah, and when I meant that, it was more towards the APIs. So one of the analogy I used to say is like, it's 2021 now. Do we talk about web servers? We did, right? We did like 10 years ago. We're all about IIS, and we have people specialize in how to set up IIS. Today is gone. It's part of it. You expect is taken for granted. It's there. So I expect APIs will be in that stage. And when it comes, like, don't even think about it. It's just natural. It has to be there. There's just no way around it. You don't even think about it anymore. But of course, yeah, you need now gRPC or other standards that comes in. You need some sort of that team maybe can go back and focus on that. Maybe the knowledge of APIs is spread up, but now that team is focused on bringing the technology forward. Like I said, yeah, no, I think those things, yes, I agree with you. Those things that can live in parallel. I was more referring to specific knowledge, get disseminated. Maybe the team goes back, work or keep an eye on what's happening, and then maybe push it back again, and then we go in cycles. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. I think then we're aligned, right? That at some point, at least, when sort of the general knowledge of API has been absorbed sufficiently, you don't need to teach that anymore.
Right.
But you will still need to. It's still, I think, an interesting thought experiment, to think about like what you and I will be doing in 10 years. I mean, we have no idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably going to be interesting, but also probably going to be different from what we're doing nowadays.
Right. Cool.
Hey, Marcelo, thank you so much. That was a fascinating conversation. I think it is something that you see in so many organizations that it's really fascinating to get an insight into how organizations function and how they do it. And in particular, when they are at this size where, like we discussed a little bit, like when you have these federation models and you can start thinking about like, it's almost like a country. It really is an interesting thing.
Yeah, my pleasure, Eric. Thanks for having me. I'm super happy to be with you. Not only I'm a big fan of long time, but so very, very humble for the invite. So.
Okay, thanks again for joining. Thanks everybody for watching. If you have any comments, please leave them down below, I guess. If you like the video, please click the like button. And I hope to see you back on this channel very soon. Bye, everybody.
See you.